Right now, your chest is doing something. Not emotionally, physically. There is a tightness, a heaviness. Maybe it sits just below your sternum. Maybe it moves up into your throat. Maybe it makes it harder to take a full breath than it should be. You did not choose that. Your body did. And here is what nobody has told you about that sensation. It is not a metaphor. It is not your imagination running wild. It is not weakness. In 2011, a team of neuroscientists at the University of Michigan put heartbroken people inside a brain scanner, people who had been through a romantic rejection in the last 6 months. They showed these people photos of their ex, and then, without warning, they burned these people's forearms with a hot probe. The brain scans were identical. The regions that lit up for the burn were the same regions that lit up for the photo of the person who left. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a breakup and a broken bone. And Carl Jung knew why, over 90 years before that scanner existed. The scientific evidence. The study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The lead researcher was Ethan Kross. At the time he ran this investigation, he was at the University of Michigan's Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. Kross was not trying to prove that heartbreak hurts. Everyone already knew that. He was trying to prove something more specific, something that, if true, would change how we understand emotional pain entirely. He wanted to know whether the brain processes the pain of rejection in the same neural hardware as physical injury. Not nearby, not in an adjacent zip code of the brain, the same region, the same circuitry, the same alarm system. The regions that activated were the posterior insular cortex and the secondary somatosensory cortex. These are not emotional regions, they are sensory regions. They are the parts of the brain that process the experience of physical sensation on and inside your body. When you put your hand on a hot stove, those regions fire. When you saw their face in that photo, those same regions fired. Your body was not being dramatic, it was being accurate. A year before Kross published his findings, a researcher named Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA had shown something related. Social exclusion, the experience of being left out, pushed away or ignored, activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. That is the brain's alarm system, the region that flags when something in the body needs urgent attention. Put Kross and Eisenberger together, and the picture becomes uncomfortable. Rejection is not processed as an emotion first. It is processed as a threat to the body first. Which raises an immediate question. Why would evolution build a brain that responds to someone not loving you the way it responds to being physically injured? That seems irrational, wasteful, counterproductive, and unless it is not, unless for most of human history, being rejected by the people you loved was, in fact, a physical threat. For the 300,000 years before modern civilization, humans who were cast out of their group, cut off from their tribe, separated from their bonded partner, did not just feel bad, they died. The brain that treats rejection like injury is not broken. It is ancient. It is running a survival program that kept your ancestors alive, and it has not updated the software. Jung's 1921 prediction. Now here is where this investigation takes a turn that I want you to sit with for a moment. In 1921, Carl Jung published Psychological Types. It is volume 6 of his collected works. It is one of the most densely argued books in the history of psychology. Most people who pick it up put it back down after 40 pages, but buried inside that book is a claim that the neuroscience community would not catch up to for nearly 90 years. Jung argued that what he called the psychic wound was not a metaphor. He was not using the word wound poetically. He meant it in a clinical sense. He he meant that emotional injury was a real physiological event in the body, not just a feeling attached to a thought. He wrote that the psyche and the soma were not two separate systems communicating across a divide. They were expressions of the same underlying reality. An injury to the emotional world was simultaneously an injury to the physical world. Most of his contemporaries thought he was being mystical. They were wrong. He was being precise. He did not have an fMRI machine. He did not have Kross's brain scans or Eisenberger's data. What he had was decades of sitting with patients whose bodies collapsed when their emotional world collapsed. Patients who developed physical symptoms, genuine medical symptoms that mapped directly onto their psychological wounds. He called this the psychoid dimension, the place where psychology and biology become indistinguishable. Think about your own experience for a second. Was there a moment in the middle of a loss when your body did something you did not give it permission to do? Your legs went weak, your stomach dropped, your vision narrowed. Jung would not have called that a stress response. He would have called it the body confirming what the mind had not yet fully processed. The physical sensation was not a side effect of the emotional pain. It was the emotional pain, expressed in the language the body knows how to speak. There is a case that makes this more concrete than any brain scan, and it involves one of the most documented lives in the history of art. The Kahlo case file. Frida Kahlo is remembered as one of the most important painters of the 20th century. She is remembered for her self-portraits, her surrealist imagery, her political convictions. She is less often remembered as a medical case study that predated the neuroscience of emotional pain by 7 decades. But that is exactly what she was. At 18, Kahlo was in a bus accident that left her with a fractured spinal column, a shattered pelvis, a broken collarbone, and a steel handrail that passed through her hip and out the other side. She spent the rest of her life in and out of hospitals. She had 35 surgical procedures. Her chronic pain was real, documented, and severe. But her physicians began noticing something they could not fully explain. Her pain flares did not follow a predictable medical pattern. They correlated with something else. Diego Rivera. Kahlo married Rivera twice. He was unfaithful chronically, including, most devastatingly, with her younger sister Cristina. The documented timeline of Kahlo's worst physical deterioration, her hospitalizations, her pain crises, tracks against the timeline of Rivera's most significant betrayals, with a consistency her physicians noted directly. She wrote in her diary in the late 1940s that she had suffered 2 great accidents in her life: the bus and Diego. She called them both accidents. She did not say one was physical and one was emotional, because for her body there was no difference. Her doctors in the 1930s and 1940s did not have the vocabulary for what they were seeing. They did not know about the posterior insular cortex. They did not have fMRI scanners. They had not read Kross, but they could see it. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss. Emotional betrayal was expressing itself as physical pain in ways that their medical training had not prepared them to explain. Jung would have understood immediately, because Frida Kahlo was not an anomaly. She was a documented example of what he had been arguing since 1921. The psychic wound is a real wound. Her paintings, the broken column, Without Hope, the 2 Fridas, were not surrealist metaphors. They were medical illustrations. The vagus nerve mechanism. So we have the brain scan evidence from Kross. We have Jung's prediction from 1921. We have Kahlo's medical records as documentation. Now I want to give you the mechanism. The specific biological pathway that explains how the loss of an attachment bond translates into the physical sensations you feel in your chest, your stomach, your throat. The vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in your body. It runs from your brain stem down through your neck, through your chest, into your abdomen. It connects your brain to your heart, your lungs, your gut. Neuroscientist Stephen Porges spent decades developing what he calls polyvagal theory. The theory maps how the vagus nerve regulates your body's response to safety and threat. Here is the part that is relevant to you right now. The vagus nerve has two main branches. One keeps you regulated, social, connected. It is the branch that lets you feel calm, present, able to make eye contact and feel warmth. The other branch, the dorsal vagal branch, governs shutdown, collapse. When your nervous system perceives a threat severe enough, it does not just give you anxiety, it shuts you down. The chest heaviness, the physical exhaustion, the difficulty breathing fully, the nausea, the sense that your body has become very heavy. That is not depression as a mood. That is dorsal vagal shutdown. A physiological state. Your body going into emergency conservation mode because it has registered a life-threatening loss. Now, go back to that sensation in your chest right now. The heaviness. That is your vagus nerve. That is your body doing what it evolved to do when a primary attachment bond is severed. It is not weakness. It is your oldest survival system working exactly as designed. And here is what Jung said about that in his Red Book, which he wrote between 1913 and 1930. He described his own night sea journey, the period of profound psychological darkness he entered after his split from Freud, as a state in which his psyche descended and his body followed. He documented in clinical detail how the loss of that intellectual attachment bond produced somatic effects that he could not will his way out of. He was not performing distress. He was reporting biology. What this means for your healing. So let me bring this together into something you can actually use. If your body has been responding to emotional loss with physical symptoms, that is not a malfunction. It is the correct response of a system that has not been given any reason to update its threat assessment. Here is what that means practically. First, stop fighting the physical symptoms as if they are the problem. They are information. Your posterior insular cortex is doing its job. Your dorsal vagal branch activated because the threat was real. Fighting those signals is like unplugging the smoke alarm while the fire is still burning. Second, the body responds to evidence of safety, not to arguments. You cannot think your vagus nerve back into regulation, but you can signal safety through the body. 3 things that the research actually supports. Slow, extended exhale breathing. The exhale activates the ventral vagal branch, the one associated with safety and social connection. Humming or singing, anything that vibrates the vagus nerve at the throat. Cold water on the face, which triggers the mammalian dive reflex and shifts vagal tone. None of these are metaphysical. They are direct inputs into the biological system that is currently in a state of alarm. And then there is what Jung would add to this. He would say that the wound is not the end of the investigation. In Psychological Types, he argued that the psychic wound, when it is worked with rather than suppressed, becomes the precise location of the most significant psychological development available to a person, not in spite of the pain. Because of it, the chest that is tight right now is not evidence that something has gone permanently wrong with you. It is evidence that your attachment system is working, that you bonded, that you were capable of the kind of connection that, when severed, registers as a genuine threat. That is not a flaw. That is the most human thing about you. Now, before you go anywhere, place one hand on your chest, not as a gesture. physically, right now. Notice what is there. That is your posterior insular cortex doing its job. That is your vagus nerve in a state it did not choose. That is a psychic wound that Jung named in 1921, and that Ethan Kross photographed in 2011, and that Frida Kahlo painted before any of us had the science to explain what she was showing us. Your body is not lying to you. It is telling the truth in the only language it knows. The next investigation goes deeper into why this keeps happening, why you keep finding the same wound in different people, why the pattern repeats. That is where we go next.